our talk about Espressobar this afternoon. My name is Stefanie Hessler. I'm the director of the Swiss Institute in New York. And I want to thank Art Genève for inviting us here, Charlotte and Laure for having us. And I think it's such a great initiative to have the institutional booth at the fair here. I want to say a few words about who we are as Swiss Institute before I introduce the artists who are here with me today. So we're an independent nonprofit. We were established 40 years ago in 1986 in New York City by Swiss artists and patrons. And we have a beautiful museum building. We're not collecting museum, and we organize exhibitions with contemporary artists, emerging artists, which for us means either young artists or overlooked positions. And it's usually the first solo exhibition by an artist in New York or in the United States. And we also have a residency program for artists from all over the world, Switzerland, as well as internationally. We have public programs, education initiatives, publications, and we do a lot of events internationally as well, one of which is Espressobar here at the fair. So that project actually began with an invitation to us to bring artists here to really think about something that is representative of our program, but perhaps also something that we haven't done previously. And together with my wonderful curator colleagues, Alison Copeland and KJ Abudu, who's also here with me, and I want to thank them for helping organize this as well, we decided that it would be fantastic to invite Egill Sæbjörnsson, Theo Triantafyllidis, and Polina Milou to present Espressobar. And as you could tell by the title already, it is a functional espresso bar. I've actually had probably a little bit too many today already. But it's a collaborative project that began between 3 artists and designers. And all of you also have some background in architecture, which is quite interesting as well, which I would like to speak about later too. But it is both the booth, it is a functional espresso bar, and it is also somewhat of a fictional space that operates between reality and fiction. And once you enter the booth, you also enter into a world that you all created together. And I wanted to ask you, why espresso, and how did this project start?
You want to start, Theo, or yet? So Theo and Polina invited me to actually to do my project Espresso Bar. That was a project that I started 2017 when I did the Icelandic Pavilion at the Venice Biennial. And then I collaborated with my 2 imaginary friends, 36-meter tall trolls, that whose favorite food is human beings. Amongst them, their most favorite is tourists. They love to eat tourists. So Venice was a very popular location for them to go to. That was the first espresso bar. Then I did another espresso bar with a friend from Iceland, Ivar Blói Gunnarsson, who was an artist, a tiny little espresso bar downtown Reykjavik. And then Theo and Polina wanted to invite me to do an espresso bar version in their exhibition space at their studio, the new beautiful studio in Athens, an old storefront, a huge space with high ceilings and a big window. And then when we started to talk together, I realized that these were good conspirators to make an espresso bar together. So we started to get all these fun ideas to make the place. And also Theo worked so much with like all these world making, and it's very easy to go into conversations about some adventures and fiction. And Polina makes the most exciting furniture that I have seen for a long time. So espresso bar obviously needs also furniture. So it was kind of really cool to have her on board as well, to make to be with us on that.
You already spoke a bit to the games and the game background as well as video games. And Egill, you have previously said that video has been around for a long time, but you realized when you started to make art, so you started to think about what is the next big thing, and for you it was a computer. And Theo, you've been working so much with video games and game engines, and so you two have that in common. And so I would love to ask you specifically about the sort of game world and video game world, which is now translated into a physical installation and performance as well.
Yeah. I think about the playfulness of a space, and it's a combination of architectural thinking and game design thinking, I think, but it's trying to make an inviting and immersive space that can tell a story by itself, and then let people enter and kind of make it. For me, that was the most exciting part about Espressobar, making this a stage where anything can happen and giving just enough information and enough world for people's imagination to start thinking, and then create their own situations, whether they be stories of hypercaffeination or new romantic encounters or new stories to tell in the space.
In your previous work, you have made these game engines that continue to develop over time. You've done the same thing also in your work. So it's a video, it's an animation, but it is also run on a program so that the animation that you see is never the same. And similarly for the Espressobar here, you've also scripted an environment. So you enter the space, there are sculptures, it looks pretty much like this. And then you also created a sort of score, a framework for the characters that inhabit the space. And there are two baristas here who are quite the characters. And I would love for you to talk a bit more about who they are and how the characters were scripted that are, of course, not controllable, but nonetheless that have a certain set of properties that make them behave in a certain way.
Yeah. There were some core instructions that we gave to the baristas. The most important ones being that they should welcome people and they should make them feel really comfortable entering the space, because the space is quite ambiguous, and I think it's very sometimes intentionally confusing whether this is a real Espressobar or an art installation or something totally different. So I think it's important for people to feel immediately welcomed. And then the second instruction is that as they start serving coffee, the interactions start to get a bit more derailed. So they might start offering too much coffee. They might start kind of like sniffing your coffee before they give it to you, or they might start whispering things to you. But then it starts getting a bit more off script. So we give the baristas a lot of space for improvisation, and we want them to read the room and understand the boundaries of each person that enters and try to understand what they need from this experience and give them a very sort of one-to-one unique experience. And then I also think about I think about this as an open performance or as an open system that creates a very wide variety of interactions.
Polina, this also brings us to your furniture and the sculptures that you've co-created together with Egill and Theo. And you've previously spoken about your own furniture as character building. And I was very curious to read that because I feel that furniture we often consider a functional element. We consider something that we interact with where perhaps we are the protagonists and the subjects and the furniture is the object. But you seem to think that furniture is more than that. And I would love for you to speak more about the idea of the character building.
Yeah, I mean, the furniture in general for me it's the way I work. There are sculptures or characters that you either can feel comfortable or uncomfortable with, you get familiar with, you use, or you can just have them in your space, accompanying you. In the specific project, that fit perfectly because the whole environment was an interactive installation that you would enter. It was like sometimes like a stage, sometimes it was something you would just pass by and look like you're looking at a screen, or you would enter and interact with the pieces, the people. And working on this project, Egill and Theo had started a little bit before, and entering basically the element that the furniture had was natural objects like stones, which is something very familiar to everyone, like almost like a primal interaction to sit on a rock. And it came very naturally to all start basically without even having to talk about it. Like, we just started creating those objects, whatever anyone was taking as a rock. And it created a language that put everything together.
What are they made from?
So the structure is wood, and we used a lot styrofoam for sculptural elements, but also we incorporated found objects that I also use very often in my work. And everyone was just basically was working like assemblage, like everyone was putting together whatever we would get our hands on, and it was going wild in the studio. Like, we were us with like 5 more people, literally like music blasting and like objects, furniture. Like, it was very interesting.
It's really fun. I think you feel that energy, both from the caffeine, but also from the fun between you in the furniture. They are sort of characters in and of themselves. And Egill, you previously mentioned the 2 trolls that took over Venice. And here there's also several characters, some of which are present in, well, the baristas, of course, but then there's also a newspaper that you made, and there's a certain cartoon that we discussed yesterday, where there are several characters as well interacting with each other in this universe that you created. So could you speak a bit to the, not trolls in this case, but the characters that inhabit Espressobar?
Yeah, I would like to continue with a little bit also what Polina was saying, that the furniture are already characters that are performing, and I think that they have their own language, like all things have their own language, which is not English or German or French or Icelandic or Greek. It's just in how tangible they are. Like a rock, a language is that if you run against the rock, it will throw you off. That's the answer. Or like if the rain rains on it, it will collect the humidity and then keep it out again. And languages are so many different kinds of languages. And so the espresso bar is kind of a personality that you go to visit. Like most of us, or hopefully many of us, had maybe a grandmother that had a kitchen. I remember in my youth, and to go to that kitchen of my grandmother was like meeting a character. Like, you could never repeat it, you could never recreate it somewhere else, because it's so specific and like conveys information that is different from any other place, which then also kind of connects to placemaking and architecture. And so there is a language, there is a message coming just from the espresso bar on its own. But as when we were playing in the beginning, there is like a logo or emblem or something like that we made just late at night. And I remember Theo scribbling some image of a flower, and then we added a cat, and we started to make a story, you know, like, oh, so okay, so what if there was like a flower that was very harmonious? And Fabian was also with us, sitting over there, and we were like fabricating. So yeah, so what if there was like a flower that was very harmonious in nature, and then gives out seeds, and the cat eats the seeds, and then coos the seeds, and then the espresso spirit comes and collects the poo from the cat and takes it to the espresso bar and fries the beans and makes a coffee. And we thought that also that would actually be one creature. Like those three things is actually one creature and operates together. And then it's like, when you go and drink coffee, it's like the spirit of the coffee would also influence how you're thinking and saying.
You speak about language of material, of furniture, of rocks. You speak about other characters such as a cat or the espresso element. So I would love for you to expand a bit more on the non-human and the caffeine as that force.
I think that human culture has grown to depend a lot on this spirit of caffeine, and it's almost this the coffee bean and the coffee plant are this force of nature on their own at this point that is playing such a fundamental role in how our everyday lives are structured and how our communities are functioning. It's a cornerstone somehow.
Yeah, can I add to it maybe also? I think that talking about all these non-human actors, like Polina was also talking about the furniture, I think. I think that's something that we deal with a lot in our other works as well. Yeah, it's a kind of I did a lecture performance which was about object species, and one of them could be art, for example, because for a species to exist, it has to kind of replicate, and we are used to think that humans replicate on their own and plants they replicate, sometimes with the help of the bee or something like that. But if we look deep into it, even humans cannot replicate on their own. They need the assistance of water, of microbiotic biomes, and even bacteria. And there's actually a million things that make it possible for a human being to replicate. So even we could even look. So art is kind of like an object. Would then be an object species that we are part of creating, but the art is also part of creating who humans are. And if a chair would be an object species, then somebody would have a chair and likes the chair so much that they sit on the chair 20 times a day, and they love the chair so much that when it starts breaking it, they make a new chair so that it helps the chair to replicate. And the chair also changes who we are.
I wanted to say about all this, about the spirit of the space. And one thing that's happening a lot here, and when we had it in Athens, where it was a space outrovert, towards the city. So what was very interesting is that how people would perceive it. You could see people like a curator or an artist perceiving it and interacting with it the exact same way that you would see a child or someone from the neighborhood that has no contact with art. And it felt like no matter whether they knew or not about art or whether they would understand or not, you would see the exact same behavior, interacting the exact same way with the performers, being curious about the cat poop or the whatever the performers were telling people. And it was very interesting to see how easy it was for someone not familiar with art, without realizing, getting in the spirit of whatever was happening in the moment. And that was it for me, the non-human element, was like you were possessed. And even if you didn't get in the space and just people were walking outside and kind of afraid, still they would peek in and trying to understand what is going on. And even the being afraid of entering this world was very interesting.
I mean, it's interesting what you were saying also with how culture replicates through us and how as humans we don't reproduce without all of these other elements, be it water, be it microbes and so on. There's also something to be said about the sort of culture, or there's almost something like a meme that's present there, which also replicates. It made me think too that there's a cat present. Cats apparently give viruses to humans, which make us take care of them. So there's all of these other and I'm sure we all have it. I definitely do. But there's all these other sort of forces that exist in and through us. And so espresso, of course, is one of those examples, but also the way that we interact because of certain architectural elements that are present in the space that structure our movement, that structure our behavior and attitude toward one another. And I think what you do so successfully with the Espressobar is really to sort of merge the fictitious, or you create a sort of new ritual, a new space in which you enter, and which then shapes our interactions very differently. I wanted to ask you about the role of ritual and the theatrical in each of your works, because there is that present, I think, in the way that you work as artists and as designers as well.
I think I definitely think a lot about the work in a theatrical perspective occasionally, or like for each project I like to change hats and try to perceive it from different perspectives. And here I think it was a very important element to think about, also because architecturally we had this facade on the street, and actually here also I wanted to say thank you for the invitation and for giving us this really amazing context for the Espressobar, because I think that the context of the booth and within an art fair is really the ideal kind of scenario for this kind of space to live in, because it can inhabit this duality of is this like actual coffee shop of the fair, or is it a booth, or is the institutional booth, and operate in this gray zone, and also create this very interesting barrier of like once you enter the booth you immediately are entering another world and have to feel like you are a little bit on a stage, and feel like and also even watching other people, how they interact within the booth and sitting outside creates such a strong theatrical sort of distance.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, because the setting is so important, and like I mean, the city is kind of like the biggest stage, that we live in, or like even we could say the city is the biggest painting that we live inside in our lives, and it affects us so much. And there's so much of buildings that are being built now all around the world that are so simplistic, and they're give the sensation of being so cheap that I don't think it's a good nourishment for society. I think it's very dangerous what is happening, and we need to have more environment that gives you love, that makes you feel good and feel nourished. And I remember like in the 80s as a teenager going to art exhibitions and standing on a cold concrete floor and white walls with light and something very intellectual on the walls that I was supposed to understand and couldn't understand, and kind of just felt like I was a total idiot or something when I left the building. Instead of like when you sit down with friends and you have a cup of coffee or tea or something else, and good conversations start to flourish, and you get excited, and you get like kind of like, oh, I would love to do something. I think that which is such an important element for society, to be excited about something. So this placemaking is an absolute comment on architecture. Like that's, to have it warm and with the complex surfaces, because they nourish us more than things that are just simple. Something that you can see and understand in 1 second gives you less than something that has complexity in it. It doesn't have to be old-styled ornament. It can be all kinds of things, and it doesn't have to be all the time. But there's definitely too little of it in the built environment today.
Yeah, and while you were speaking, I was thinking how important it is. I don't know if it's architecture that made it to us. Like, I wanted to say it very simplistic way, the vibing. That I think we've never talked about it like clearly, but it was a very important thing from the beginning, and I think we all do it in our work, having good vibes and entering a world where you just feel immediately like good and like you want to stay, and the conversations start themselves like growing through the vibes of this space. And I think it has to do with a lot the way we all three think about the space. We all have, in a way, in our work, stage elements. Like while you were speaking before, I was thinking of works from Egill and Theo and myself where the setup was all like you're entering a space with characters. And I think that was a very common thing that without realizing, I created that space without even realizing we're doing that.
Totally.
You're also thinking about both the built environment, architecture, and objects as sort of infrastructural, physical elements, but then also culture, interaction, language as these immaterial elements, systems, processes that shape our interactions. And I think that also is what you really combine well with Espressobar, both the physical environment into which somebody enters, but then also the different codes of behavior, be it of the baristas or of what an art fair visitor who steps into the booth might expect, might do when they speak with the baristas and order their espresso and sit down and have a chat. And that also connects again to the virtual and digital environments that you've been working in, where you're, especially, I guess, Egill and Theo are mostly involved in world building. And what I find fascinating as well is this genre live action role play, where performers are, there's a certain script that is written and certain characters are written. However, the performance takes place live and people interact live with one another and shape whatever comes out of the game. So it's sort of that writing of a score of a script, which is then interpreted by people, which is different from theater, which is much more scripted. And so I'd love for you to speak a bit more about world building in a most expansive sense.
Can I say something a little bit about it? So, from my behalf, I have been I've been in a imagined universe with my brother since we were children, and we are two characters. So this is like from the 80s. We're still doing it. So he's a piggy and I'm Ratty. No comments on what is noble and unnoble or whatever that is. We are Ratty and Piggy. And we even still, when we are on the phone, it's just talking about the what is Ratty doing and what is Piggy doing, and it's just like playing like you are still children, and it's such an outlet. And I think that, and then the trolls are also two characters. Like they definitely do things that I wouldn't do alone, and I think that I'm also there interacting with the idea of the troll that comes from others. So there's like an input. Trolls exist in like I think almost all cultures in one way or another, and everyone connects with it in different ways. And I think that's also in Theo's works, there's always these characters, both human and non-human, and that are kind of at function, right? You want to say more?
Yeah, I think for me, like the LARP has been specifically like a really fun kind of format to try as a artwork. I really love this part of like, as an artist, you have you kind of like create the conditions for an open field of possibilities to happen, and you give some initial direction, and you give a world where things can happen, and some characters, and some sort of first hints of what can happen, but then players or an art audience enter this space and they have a lot of freedom to explore. And this is also a very interesting tool. This role-playing, I think, is a very interesting tool for testing boundaries and testing new ideas, or explaining worldviews that are not necessarily something you would easily want to mentally exercise in. And it has been, I think, a very interesting tool for trying out these different scenarios and learning through that.
Yeah, I think even as an art institution, that's something that we like to do at Swiss Institute, where we invite experimental practices to explore, to try out something. And I feel that art as a sort of experimental field in which we can reconsider certain things that we take for granted, certain ideas about ourselves or about the world, is really, really powerful. In fact, it goes back all the way to the surrealists, who were inventing games to play with one another, which subverted certain norms or expectations of how one might behave or of language. And I think just sort of undermining the expectations of our interactions, or just inserting that little bit of an absurdist, surreal, fun element, even in the interaction with the baristas here, really makes you sort of, it wakes you up in more ways than the espresso alone does. Yeah.
Totally.
Polina, you've also mentioned that for you, music is really important as a reference, and movies, particularly horror movies. And I personally cannot watch horror movies. We had a conversation with Mojde and Lucas, who are here with me from Swiss Institute as well, about this a couple of days ago. But I wonder, what is it about horror? Is it because it is so extreme, or is it because what is it that fascinates you?
This kind of connects to both the previous question and this about rituals and what you do in the studio. That studio is a world itself, and no matter what you're doing, the environment from the student, the atmosphere, each one of us have a very certain situation going. I have very often horror movies playing in the background while I make very playful sculptural furniture at the same time. I don't know if subconsciously it's like a contrast I'm creating, being in two worlds at the same time. I think it is something like that. And connecting to the previous question about the rituals and games, another thing, again, in my studio that connects with all this is that I actually also play games with myself, creating languages and algorithms and putting parameters to create these creatures. So these two things all together come and connect with those two guys.
So cool. So you like playing when you're making the...
Yeah, I'm actually the hub there. I make rules and things come up almost on CD.
You don't take payment for the coffee. And I think that's wonderful, of course, but I wonder, is there something to that gesture of generosity that is important to you? What made you do that?
Well, we hadn't set up properly the accounting side of taking payments in the but yeah, the generosity is important in this project. And I think, like, in a way, we have also experimenting with the baristas yesterday, asking for people to give something in return, but that can be a compliment or a story or like a small found object or a token, because the exchange is also an interesting part of this interaction. But I think the giving the coffee for free was firstly maybe started from the Athens version because we wanted to. Part of the whole gesture was to open our studio to the neighborhood and introduce it because we just moved in the neighborhood and kind of invite all our neighbors for a coffee and get to meet them, and because they saw us like moving in with all these weird objects and they couldn't understand what is happening in the space, and yeah, it was a gesture towards the neighborhood, and similarly, I think for the fair it makes sense. It's also the law. You have to have a license to run a place that you can sell things in, and so.
But it's interesting that because we didn't have the law, we found different ways of exchange, not money, coffee.
Yeah, that's really good.
You could exchange a little poem. People left kisses in napkins.
And size, and then people have more money left to buy art at the fair. We're actually organizing with Swiss Institute because we turned 40 this year. So we're organizing an exhibition in Zurich, which will open on June 12th as part of Zurich Art Weekend at the Luma Westbau. And the theme of that exhibition is re-gift. So it's thinking about the gift economy and other alternative forms of economy, but also a gift that you receive and that you pass on, and how gifts and gestures of generosity also create social bonds, sometimes obligations. And so I found it fascinating that you also decided not to charge for the coffee for numerous reasons. I have one last question for you, and then if we have any questions from you, we can open up. What is the next step for Espressobar? Is it going to continue nomadically, or is it going to be returning to Athens, maybe Iceland at some point?
We have a few requests for the Espressobar to appear in different places. Nothing has been concretized and make up a word. Yeah. Hopefully it continues to exist in the world as a creature, appearing in different places.
Continue and evolve in a way. Every time something comes up, like this, for example, which was amazing, we had new ideas coming in, and that brought even more new ideas for the future, things we want to add to this world. So I think it kind of is gonna live on its own, depending how it's gonna interact with the audience and interest that comes.
Yeah, and we also like to think about it as an open system that can adapt to different situations and be site specific, and maybe like it's also like a very open-ended brand that can carry some of the core ideas, but for example, we could have a very different physical appearance depending on where it lands.
Just like stop. So I hope that Espressobar, just like the volcano, the hissy sometimes in the berg, is going to be erupting in other parts of the world as well. And thank you for bringing Espressobar here. I'm ready with Swiss Institute. Thank you again to Art Genève as well. And thank you for the espresso. Stay for the espresso.